Hi there. Before we begin with today's episode, we had one request from you. If you've been listening to our podcast, if you or your loved ones find our episodes useful and helpful, we request you to please like, share, subscribe, and follow us on YouTube, Spotify, Amazon Music, and LinkedIn. It really helps us keep ourselves motivated to make these episodes and also helps us reach a larger audience who may benefit from hearing these stories and helping them through a career transition. Thank you and keep listening. Hello, listeners. Welcome to Happy Mind, Happy Lawyer podcast, a podcast which is dedicated to exploring work lives of lawyers. We are starting off with our ex-lawyer series. In each episode of this series, we sit down with a former lawyer who has taken the bold step of leaving law to pursue new and diverse career paths. We will delve into their stories, the challenges that they faced, the lessons learned, and the uncharted opportunities they discovered along the way. Whether you're a seasoned legal professional, wondering about a career change, or just curious about what lies beyond the courtroom of a law firm, this series offers valuable insights and guidance. Join us as we uncover the realities of making a career shift, the strategies for success, and how to navigate the uncertainties that come with change. I'm Kanika Kadam, your host for this podcast. I'm an organizational psychologist and a work coach at Happy Mind, Happy Lawyer, aka HMHL. And I worked as a banking and finance lawyer for a long time. At Happy Mind, Happy Lawyer, our aim is to help people build happier work lives, whether it's within the legal profession or outside of it. We offer consulting and workshops to law firms and organizations on their organizational behavior issues and coaching and mentorship to individual lawyers for their work-related problems. In today's episode, we have with us Malika Hegde. She's a former tax lawyer turned designer. She's currently doing her Master of Fine Arts in Communication Design at the Pratt Institute in New York. So, hi Malika, welcome to the show.
Hi, Kanika. Thank you for having me.
I was looking at your LinkedIn profile and you're doing so many things and I found it so intriguing. Like you have your own studio and you're working as a marketing intern and you're also doing some UX design. So tell me more about what you are currently doing, how you're doing all of these things.
Currently, I'm at Pratt Institute trying to graduate from my master's program. This is the last leg of the program, so that's going on. Apart from that, I'm interning as a design and marketing intern with Regime the Fleur, which is a fragrance brand. And I'm also a marketing fellow for Made in NYC, which is a nonprofit that supports local makers. So yes, I do have a lot on my plate and I'm trying to figure that out. But you've been a lawyer, you know what it's like. We get the job done, so it's okay.
So your LinkedIn bio mentions you as a multidisciplinary designer. And I found that to be really interesting. And I wanted to know more about what that term really means and what does that include, because I don't think I have seen that bio before.
I think because I'm not bound by like graphic design, I really enjoy research. I still enjoy research, so I would also go into something like human information interaction. Like it could be as simple as you going to Gmail and then saying, "Oh, we've revised the terms and conditions," and then you going through that list of terms and conditions and how you kind of by default would say, "Yes, I agree," because you cannot be bothered to read everything. So understanding like human biases and why we do certain things, that's a really interesting aspect of designing experiences for people. So that's one aspect, and the other aspect is the more obviously graphic design part where it's like logos and branding and making posters and fun stuff like that. But also posters that are not just static, they're dynamic and they change and they're motion based. And so it's very difficult to then like put yourself in one basket. That's why I call myself a multidisciplinary designer. Sounds great, right? Like it sounds very
Yes.
important.
It does. That's why it made me want to speak
Yeah,
to you more about it. So it's working.
great. It's working. Yeah.
Yes. And how did you move on to this career? So let's go back to your journey as a lawyer. The
Mm.
first question, why did you join law in the first place?
Yeah, given everything, I also sometimes ask myself that question. But honestly, what happened was my initial plan was to get into journalism and specifically print journalism because I thought I could write and that was a skill that I was confident about. And then I said, no, maybe I can push myself and get into broadcast journalism and be in a camera facing role. And then 26/11 happened, and I said, I don't think I can do this. And I wanted to figure out something that involved communication and writing and looking at different kinds of opinions and making an informed decision about it, similar to what a lot of journalists would do, right? There's research and you talk to people and you figure things out. So I said, okay, law seems like a more organic shift then. So I gave CLAT, didn't get through a college that I liked. So I went to GLC in Bombay, which is Government Law College. But I felt like I wasn't pushing myself to do more than, what was prescribed at that point of time for like a first year law student. So I gave CLAT again and I joined GNLU. So that's been my journey really into law.
And how was your experience working at the various places that you worked in? So you worked in SAM, Ketan, and another law chambers, right? How was that like?
Honestly, after a point, I felt like the experiences were largely the same because at an organizational level, yeah, and maybe also just the fact that the people I was working with were products of those organizations. So it felt all the same at the end of the day. And given the high attrition rate that law firms typically have, you're essentially interacting with the same bunch of people. Just sometimes it's in a different law firm. And honestly, I think given my personality and given the fact that I'm very creatively driven, and I think when you're creatively driven, there's a lot of it that you draw from your individuality. And I feel like corporate law firms are not really places that kind of appreciate individuality. They're built differently. So I would definitely say that that was like a core friction. Of course, it was easy to mask it because you're in a corporate environment and you figure things out. But I think that was really the core of it. And then dealing with like the organizational problems of like having people have some really toxic work habits and just trying to wrap my head around it. But honestly, across the board, barring a few instances of like good mentors and good supervisors, it was by and large the same.
And what kind of work did you do when you were working as a lawyer?
Right. So when I joined Khaitan, I joined as a first year student, and at that point they had a rotation policy. So I did 6 months in corporate, 3 months in tax, and 3 months in litigation. And at the end of it, I realized I wanted to do tax because it was more creative and more challenging and more had more problem solving in it, at least more directly, even at a junior level. And unfortunately, Khaitan didn't have space for me at my position in their tax team. So I said, I don't want to waste time doing something I don't have an interest in, which was corporate law. So I switched and I joined Rao Law Chambers, which then got absorbed by AZB. But sometime around that time, I was like considering whether I want to do law, right? So I remember taking a sabbatical and then saying, okay, let me think this through before like jumping into another job and like going through the whole thing all over again. And I did, and I said, you know what, let me just give this one last try. And then I applied to SAM and I got through and I worked there as a tax lawyer. By and large, have worked in direct tax and a little bit of private client practice.
So overall, how many years would you have worked as a lawyer then?
About 3.5 years.
And when did you start thinking about leaving law?
This was 6 months into my job. Fairly early, right? No, actually, honestly, I think it was third year of law school where I was like, should I even be here? Like, and this big question. And at that time, I kind of convinced myself it was just job insecurity and that sort of pressure that comes in where you're like, I have to get a job, I have to get a job. I said, it's probably just that. But it was actually, I mean, while I was working, it was 6 months into the job. I had gone to Pondicherry for a trip and I had gone to this pottery studio that I had always meant to go to. Like, it was this whole thing that I had planned when I was younger that I will take 1 year off and I will go to this pottery studio and, learn the basics and really commit to it. And I went there mostly as a visitor. Like, I mean, I wasn't going there to, I wasn't going to leave my job and then suddenly join the studio. But that studio had some sort of magic. I don't know what it was. I came back and I remember writing in like, I had a travel diary at that point. And I wrote like, I felt alive and like, I really felt like I could do things beyond law. And I started laughing because in the pandemic, I was clearing things out and I was reading it and I was like, I maybe should have listened to myself uh, 6 months in. But anyway,
Seems like you knew that you wanted to leave law quite early on. And thank you for sharing that experience. How did you move out of law then? Like, how did you decide to go to Pratt Institute?
oh, that was a very long journey. So I quit in November 2019 and then I chilled in December. Then January 2020 onwards, I started saying, okay, I need to kind of apply and look at design more seriously. So I said, okay, I'll apply to IIT Bombay has a design school called IDC, and NID Ahmedabad also has a master's course. So I said, let me target these two. In the meanwhile, I have to keep myself employed. I have to earn some money, even if I'm living rent free at my parents' house. So I said, okay, let me try designing by myself. It was a very difficult journey, I might add. And over the time, I said, okay, I started getting better and I got through NID Ahmedabad for their master's program. But at the same time, I was also applying for jobs because I felt like it would add credibility to me shifting to design. And I got a job at Art Deco Mumbai as their communication and design practitioner. And at that point, it was like this crazy decision where I had to choose between a job and like going back to school. And I said, I mean, I can go back to school, but I think like I really need the money and I think I need to go back to work and like meet human beings. And because this was in the middle of the pandemic, so I think I really yearned for just having a water cooler conversation, if nothing else. And so I went back and slowly I was like, okay, this is great. Pretty much an extension of what I've been doing so far, except at an organizational level because you're responsible for how the brand is positioned and like thinking about it beyond just like designing a series for social media or designing I don't know, like it could be an external document that goes out to someone who wants to know about the organization. So it was more about branding and positioning. And I think through that experience, I was like, okay, I think I've got a handle on this. Maybe let me see what happens if I apply to schools abroad. And that's when I applied to Pratt and they took me and then now I'm here.
And financially, how did you manage all of this? Because one of the things that does affect a career
Yeah.
transition is your finances, right? And as you also mentioned, that that is always in your head, right? Where am I going to get the money from to sustain myself while I'm transitioning? So how did you manage
Yeah. I think a heavy dose of privilege, for sure.
that?
And the lack of financial responsibilities that comes with it. I am very grateful for that. And I was living with my parents in Bombay rent free. So, and I had savings because throughout, I mean, except for the time I was in Bangalore, I was staying in Bombay and I was staying at home. So I didn't pay Bombay's astronomical rent like a lot of my peers. So I managed to save. That's pretty much how I managed.
And how difficult was the transition for you?
Like mentally,
Yeah.
I would say it was tricky because I was transitioning in the middle of the pandemic. And actually, I was supposed to intern with an ad agency. And I think 2 days later, there was this whole conversation about some virus and people falling sick. And then we know what happened. And the problem was that the agency didn't know quite how to like take on an intern. Like they were just figuring out stuff for their employees. So I also don't fault them for it. And so like I had to learn how to upskill by myself. Design softwares are incredibly expensive. So I was using open source softwares and trying to develop skills on that front. And I think mentally, it was like I was just trying to be like, look, this is it. Like I've committed to this, and you can have as many plan Bs and plan Cs, which I had, but I was like, the point is to kind of stick to this and see where it goes. And I think like just having my parents' support was like really helpful because they were apprehensive. I'm not going to like gloss it and say that they were like, oh, really gung ho about it. They were very apprehensive as well, but they were supportive in the way that they could be supportive. And I think that really held me in good stead.
Yeah, some kind of support from family, friends. I think that's really important when you're making the transition. What would you say was the most challenging thing about this transition?
I think like at a more personal level, I think I had a lot of dreams lined up with like, oh, being a lawyer and what it means to be a lawyer and attaching a lot of my self-worth and value to it. Like I think that's the other side of it, right? And so when you give up this sort of dream, you kind of also give up a lot of dreams at the same time. I realized this much later that the challenge really was for me to grieve the loss of that part. Because I had thought that, oh, this is what law is going to be. It did not match my expectations. And so I think that grieving period is important, like for you to be able to reconcile with your reality. It wasn't like I quit and I was like gung ho, like let's go. I am going to be A1 designer. Like you have that moment of like you're reevaluating a lot of things because everything then kind of shifts into that perspective. So I think that was really challenging. And that's not like I think it's an ongoing process, especially as you move in a different career and you see peers moving into their careers, then you're like, oh, this is interesting. Like this person is doing this. It's not a question of comparison. It's just a question of like, this is what you had to give up for you to be here and like being at peace with it.
I'm
Yeah.
glad that you said that because nobody really talks about the grieving process because you're leaving behind like so much because you spent so many years actually doing that thing. Because when you
Yeah.
were doing that, it was not as if like, you always were with the mindset that I'm going to leave this sometime. So, yes, that grieving of the loss of that earlier career identity, I think that's important. And did you have any fears? Were you afraid of, making this career transition?
I think I was definitely scared. I was terrified. I remember having this really intense conversation with yourself first, and then you have it with people around you. And I remember telling my parents, and they were a little taken aback. And it wasn't like I feared what they would say, but I was like apprehensive about like how they would receive it and what questions they would ask because they were such a big part of this journey, right? I mean, like the reason I could go to law school is because my parents paid for my tuition. It's as much a part of their journey, to be honest, in a lot of ways. And I think the other thing that was really scary, I think, to deal with was like not knowing people in design. In a law firm or I think in law, even if you're switching out from different firms, you know somebody at some firm that will kind of tell you, okay, apply for this, avoid this team, go for this team. I mean, you're informed. I was like absolutely not informed. And I don't think I had any designers within my friend circle. So it was like going in a little, I wouldn't say completely blind, but a little bit unaware about a lot of industry challenges, industry practices. But yeah, I think that was scary.
And how did you manage that?
I did not handle it well, honestly, initially, because I did not handle being scared very well initially. And then over time, I kind of like figured it out. I think a lot of times you have to spend time kind of reassuring yourself, but also like not fall into that trap of like spiraling and being like, oh my God, what if I can't do this? So that's tricky and it took time. And I think the thing that really helped was just showing up, like just being there, responding to emails and kind of saying, okay, if I don't feel like doing X, then I will do Y so I can take my mind off whatever background noise is going on about fears and challenges. And so then automatically it would put me in a routine and then I would be like, okay, then we can tackle everything else. But it took time. It wasn't something that came automatically to me, at least.
That's such a great way to manage those fears in your mind. And I think that's going to be really useful for our listeners who are probably going through that career transition right now or are thinking about making that career shift. Just what you said, I do believe that the first step is to show up. And in this case, you show up for yourself. Also, was it difficult to move out of India to a new place?
So for me, the challenge really wasn't the city or the language. It was more like just getting used to student life and like being in a classroom with people who are significantly younger. Like I'm one of the older people in my cohort, and I'm like, wow. So being in a classroom with people who are younger, maybe sometimes older than you, and just kind of understanding where you sit in that space was challenging.
Moving on to my next question. How did you start your own studio? And how difficult was it? And how exciting was it?
Honestly, the studio was my parents' house. It was me in my parents' house, and I was like, look, it's the pandemic. I'm not gonna get hired. I just have to keep. And I honestly started with illustration. I didn't even start with design. I think the first big design illustration project that I did that kind of like I pushed it out there and I was like very gung ho about was a friend's wedding card. And I think that kind of helped because after that, I kept getting wedding card invitations to make, which is really fascinating and interesting because people have very interesting ideas about how they want to be presented within the card. And slowly, what started to happen is I realized that there's a huge amount of human psychology behind this, right? Because somebody's coming to you to get something done. You're trying to, it's not just about the job, it's about understanding where they're coming from, what they like, how they want to project themselves through it. So I found that process really fascinating. And I think it wasn't just about the creative aspect of like drawing and making assets and like all of that, but I think engaging with people at a more human level and not looking at them as quote unquote client. So that really helped. And also having a large network of lawyers also helped, like just putting the word out. Even if they were like indulging me, I was like very happy to take it on because I was like, you know what, work is work. It doesn't matter.
And is there anything that you miss about working as a lawyer?
Ah, no. If I say that, I think maybe the perks of working in a big organization, maybe that, like just, I don't know, late night drop off or something of that sort. But like, I don't, I don't particularly miss practicing in a law firm.
Were there any aspects of law that you did enjoy working
Oh yeah, I think the research aspect of it, and like a lot of times in tax, it was not just advisory, like just sending out a memo. Sometimes it would be something that was potentially going to go into litigation. And so we had a chance to kind of like help them strategize, or sometimes it was while they were in the middle of litigation trying to pivot themselves, or it would be like a multidisciplinary sort of approach that was really exciting. For example, tax and insolvency. Like that was really fascinating to me. I got to work very briefly on it, but it was really interesting to see like an actual interplay between laws. And I felt like I was in law school again, which you don't get that feeling a lot when you're at work.
And do you think any of your legal education or your prior work experience as a lawyer, did that help you in any way when you started the career transition and even now?
Yeah, I think it definitely did because when you're working in tax, you're doing a lot of business development, which I feel like corporate teams don't typically do. Like any niche practice area would indulge in a lot of business development because the volume of work isn't as heavy as like an M&A or a PE VC team. So what started to happen is you start thinking of different ways to approach, do business development. It's not as simple as like, doing primers and like doing summary of new law, like this very sort of staid idea of things. Sometimes it's about just taking like one section of the law and kind of like expanding it and looking at different ways it could impact somebody. And so I think having business development as a core part of tax practice, and especially in big law firms, really help because then you know how to pitch, you know how to field questions, you know how to talk about your work without it appearing to be very transactional. So I think those things really helped me in good stead, to be honest.
Did you explore any other things when you were thinking about, moving all out of law, or, you were clear that designing is something that you want to pursue?
No, actually, initially I was considering fine art, and then I finished the sabbatical that I mentioned about, and then I joined my last job, which was with Sam. And my mother was having an exhibition at that point. She's an artist, and she wanted some invite or placard to be made so that it would be kept at the front of the gallery space. So I said, you know what, I'll give it a try. And I did it, and my mother liked it. And my mother, she doesn't like something, she'll tell me. So it wasn't like, let me just take whatever my daughters made. So I was like, okay, great. This was a great boost in confidence. I know for a fact that design had more money than fine art does, and it takes years for you to get any sort of recognition, financial or otherwise, in fine art. And so I said, okay, this is it. This is design. The other thing that I considered was marketing. Funnily enough, in all of my jobs that I've had ever since I've left law, and in all of the assignments that I've had, there has been a marketing influence in it. So that's something that's parallelly been happening, but it's not a conscious choice.
And the current places that you're interning at, how has your experience been like there?
Oh, it's been really good. I think they're both very small organizations, very different approaches to work, but I think there has been a lot of space to kind of do different types of things. So, like in one organization, I'm doing packaging design and like 3D modeling, and in the other one, I'm like doing content development and trying to help out with marketing strategy. So you're getting an idea of like what it would be like if 10 years down the line, if I were to open my own shop, then all of these experiences kind of help because you're not, I think when you're actually working in a creative field, a lot of the work is like 10% is the actual work and 80% is like administrative work that kind of drives it. And understanding the process and enjoying the process is important. And I think these experiences are helping me with that.
What all exactly does your work involve?
Now my work is 100% only design or like communication oriented.
Yeah.
So at Regime the Fleur, I'm doing graphic design, so it could be designing labels. It's packaging design where let's say that they come out with a different product line or they're trying to change the current packaging for an existing product. So I would help them out with that. Like I would actually create like the way that it would pan out. I wouldn't be designing assets because it's a fairly established company. So I'll be designing secondary assets, but not really primary assets. So that could be stuff like how the copy is positioned within the product, or it could be like the visuals that you want to show when you're marketing a particular product. And with Made in NYC, it's a lot of understanding what local makers and manufacturers want from like the city and what their practices is about. So understanding that and developing long form and short form features for them. And the other thing is like marketing strategy or helping out with events. So right now we have an event called Made in NYC Week where you're celebrating local manufacturers. So just helping out with like making social media assets or signage, directional signage, which is like really random, but is a part of graphic design again. So stuff like that, yeah. It's pretty exciting and very different from each other.
If you have to compare the working conditions while you were working in India to the other places that you're working in outside India, do you see any difference between the two?
Oh, massive, massive differences. I don't know whether it's because it's the size of the organization or it's generally people are very polite and very nice. And I feel like the default setting isn't conflict, or the default setting isn't let me be an Indian parent to you in a workplace. Let me use fear and threats as a motivator for you to do your work. I haven't encountered that, which was my experience before. So I think that's a massive difference. The other thing is punctuality. I think like there is a lot of stock put into like just being on time. Like that's a big part of the job. And in India, it's a little lax. I'm not going to lie, and I have taken advantage of it. So I'd be lying if I didn't. But here, I think it's pretty punctual, and they respect your boundaries. They won't bother you on a weekend, which I think is great.
And now that you're outside the law and you
Yeah.
can look at the legal profession from an outside lens, what do you think
Mhm.
of the legal profession in India?
I think that I'm grateful for some of the experiences that I've had and for some of the people I've met along the way. But I think it needs a massive rehaul, especially because now I can see my peers entering senior management. And they are trying their level best to not repeat patterns that they've seen or they've been subjected to. But I also realize like it's an organizational issue. So somewhere like somebody has to break that cycle. I think when I'm having conversations with people and they're like, oh, people these days don't even want to work, or they complain when they want to work, they have to work beyond 10:30 p.m. And I was like, that's valid. I mean, we complained about this when we were younger, so why not consider that? They're like, yeah, we could, but then there is an overwhelming pressure from our seniors as well and from clients. And how do you kind of then not get sandwiched between that? So I feel bad for them, but I also feel like there has to be some way to kind of break that cycle. And I don't know what it is.
I think there's two aspects to it. So one, you mentioned about this being an organizational issue, which it is because it's the culture which is dictating the behavior of people in the organization, right? So if the culture within that organization or even within the profession is such that people are expected to work on holidays or work on weekends or to sacrifice their personal time for work, then that is what the people who are ingrained in the culture and have grown up in the culture will be doing and expecting others to do that, right? Anybody who challenges that, for example, a junior who is not yet ingrained in the culture, would seem as somebody who is acting out of the ordinary. So that's one aspect of it. And I think the other aspect is also individually what you can do, because at an individual level, your smaller actions do lead to bigger changes. And that's how eventually culture shift can happen. But I also, understand the senior level. How do you balance the expectations that are coming from your seniors and the well-being of your juniors and expectations of the clients, and how do you not get sandwiched between all of this, right? So sometimes it can come to a question of either I can save my weekend or I can save my junior's weekend, and sometimes there is no choice at all, right? Because you have to deliver. So to address this, I think organizational change is way important, right? It has to come from the senior management that we want to improve the well-being of our people at all levels. Then we have to think again about what are our expectations and what is the impact of what we ask our people to do having on them, right? And how is it trickling down? How is the stress trickling down um, to everybody within the organization, affecting their well-being? So I think both of the things have to go hand in hand for us to be able to make some change. And I think the organizational psychologist in me has talked too much about it. So I'll move on to the next question. Do you have any views on how we can improve the mental well-being in the legal profession? Because you were a lawyer before.
Oh. I think there should be like a mandatory sabbatical every 3 years. I genuinely think like because when people take leave, they don't really get leave. I mean, let's just start with that. Like just respecting people's boundaries while they're on leave. I think then they'll want to come back
Mm.
because they're like, look, they let me be. I just, I think I want to just start with that. I like the bigger problems. I think people who are far more adept and who've studied organizational psychology, for example, you would know how to deal with the bigger problems. But like, I think at a very personal level, I would be like, I just want leave to be leave. Like, I just want to be away from office and not be bothered with emails. So yeah, that's my contribution.
I think that's a very basic ask and very achievable as well. So we will get there. Last question. What advice would you like to give somebody who is thinking of moving out of law?
I think if they want to move out of law, I think I want to just address one thing, which really bothers me when I talk to lawyers who are like, I really want to, sunk cost. And I'm like, oh my God, sunk cost is a fallacy. Like you are thinking about how much time and effort you've put in into this. I get it. I completely get it. I've been in that position. But it's even like to me, it's more clear that, it'd be more beneficial for you to pivot away from that and do something that, or at least take the time to think about what you want instead of being like, oh, sunk cost, sunk cost. That really like it drives me mad. But I mean, that's the advice that I would like to give.
That's all for the podcast, Monica. Thank you so much for
Thank you so much.
being here.
Yeah.
And I really wish you all the best. Like, you're already doing so many things, and that is again like really motivating to see.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for having me. And I hope whatever you're trying to do really works. I mean, that would be amazing.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
So that was Malika Hegde, an ex-tax lawyer turned multidisciplinary designer. If you want to look at her portfolio and see some of her projects, you can go to www.studiomkh.com. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the HMHL podcast. It's our hope that these stories and insights not only inspire you, but also empower you in your professional journey, whether within the legal field or beyond. Remember, change is a journey, and Happy Mind, Happy Lawyer is here to support you every step of the way. To learn more about our work and access our resources for your career transition, visit www.happymindhappylawyer.com or email us at contact@happymindhappylawyer.com. Don't forget to share this with someone who might find it useful and subscribe for more inspiring stories from ex-lawyers who've paved their paths to success. Remember, you have the power to redefine your career and find joy in your work. Until next time, I'm Kanika, wishing you clarity, courage, and a happy mind.